Welcome to Relationship Reset with life coach Dr. Mark Shook. In each podcast, Mark will weave together the ancient truths of Scripture with the latest cutting-edge neuroscience in short, concise, effective, and doable principles and actions to reset your relationship dynamic.
Hi, and welcome. I'm Mark Shook. I'm your host for Relationship Reset, where we're going to take deep dives into what it takes to have an amazing romantic relationship. I am telling you these secrets that I'm talking about right now are the things that have turned my marriage around in such a powerful way and made it the sweetest thing in my life. We looked last week at the first of the 7 conversations in Sue Johnson's emotionally focused therapy, and that was discovering those destructive patterns. If you didn't see that, go back and check that out. But today, we're going to look at that second conversation, finding the raw spots, understanding emotional triggers. Once couples identify destructive patterns, the next step is to dig deeper and find the raw spots. Dr. Sue Johnson in Emotionally Focused Therapy explains that many of the conflicts couples experience are not really about the issue at hand, whether it's money, chores, or spending time together. It's about deeper emotional sensitivities. She calls them raw spots. And these raw spots are like emotional bruises. Just as a physical bruise hurts when pressed on, raw spots trigger emotional pain when touched. And they're hidden emotional wounds from past experiences, often in childhood, sometimes in earlier romantic relationships that make us extra sensitive in certain situations. When these raw spots are triggered in a relationship, they can cause overreactions, misunderstandings, defensive behaviors, and again, they push partners apart. So today, we're going to dive into how to identify and address these raw spots so that we can heal, so that we can move toward deeper connection with our partners. So let's start with what are raw spots. What do I mean when I say it's a raw spot or a trigger? A raw spot is an emotional vulnerability that stems from earlier life experiences, particularly those related to how we learned to form attachments in childhood. These raw spots are like emotional echoes from time past, times when we felt hurt, rejected, or unimportant. Raw spots develop when we've experienced emotional pain in the past, whether it's from childhood wounds or those past romantic relationships, or even in our current relationship. You can have some raw spots that developed if you've been together for a while. They become sensitive areas that make us prone to react strongly when a similar situation arises. For example, if someone grew up in a household where they felt ignored or neglected, they might develop a raw spot around feeling unimportant or invisible. So when their partner doesn't respond to a text message right away or seems distracted, that raw spot gets triggered and they feel intense emotional pain far beyond what the situation would call for. That's one of the ways that you recognize a raw spot, because you think, I should be at a 2 or a 3 on a scale of 1 to 10 in my emotions, but I'm off the scale. I'm at 11. I'm at 9. And a partner can see that too, because it's like, I don't know what just happened. We were doing okay, and then all of a sudden now, wow. So how do those raw spots show up in relationships? When they're triggered, they often lead to those disproportionate reactions. So watch for those moments when you or your partner suddenly feel a lot more hurt or angry than the situation calls for. So that's what the cue, that's what you're looking for. Imagine a scenario where a husband makes a joke during dinner and his wife suddenly withdraws or becomes defensive. On the surface, it seems like an innocent comment, but it might have touched a raw spot for the wife. Maybe she grew up in a home where she felt criticized or belittled. And the joke, even though it wasn't intended to hurt, and maybe it was really funny, and it was given in even with a good heart, good humor, it triggered that feeling of inadequacy or rejection. Another example, Could be a partner who feels abandoned when the other needs time alone or is busy at work. The raw spot of feeling abandoned might come from childhood where they felt emotionally distant from a parent. Now, even a simple request for space or time apart could cause this partner to feel intensely rejected, far beyond what the situation would call for. These reactions aren't about that present situation alone. That just triggered it. That just got it going. They're tied to old emotional wounds. It's like the present moment presses on that bruise from the past, making the reaction 10 times as intense. And unless couples understand that raw spots are being triggered, they'll often think the conflict is about something else entirely, like the surface things they were talking about, like chores or schedules or tone of voice, when the real issue is emotional vulnerability. So why do raw spots matter in relationships? Understanding and identifying them is vital for creating those emotional safety nets, the healing in relationships. When raw spots go unrecognized, couples can easily fall into a cycle of misunderstanding, defensiveness, and escalating conflicts. I see this all the time. Why? Because when a raw spot gets triggered, people often react automatically with defensiveness, anger, withdrawal, different strategies that they've used in the past to protect themselves from emotional pain. But these reactions push partners away. They prevent that deeper emotional connection that you're longing for. If you don't recognize the raw spot, a partner might see the emotional reaction as irrational or excessive, which can lead to frustration, to distancing. But once you understand that there's an underlying vulnerability there that's driving the reaction, you can respond with empathy rather than defensiveness. See, when I understood Laura's raw spots, I understood the times when she was distancing. When she understood my raw spots, she understood that those attempts for connection, that I was always seeking to connect, and it just gave us a new compassion for each other because we saw, oh, this is where that came from. This is what's going on now. This is a trigger. This is a raw spot. This is an attachment bruise. Finding the raw spots is about understanding that what we see on the surface, armored emotions again, anger, frustration, withdrawal, is often just a cover for a deep emotional pain. And when we tune into that pain, we can start to heal together. Well, how do you find the raw spots? How do you actually go about finding those raw spots in your relationship? I told you first, notice your strong reactions. Start by paying attention to those moments when you and your partner have a strong emotional reaction to something that seems relatively minor. It's usually a sign that a raw spot has been touched. And if you feel unexpectedly hurt, angry, anxious, ask yourself, is this really about what just happened, or is this tapping into something deeper? I know Laura had this tendency that she didn't even know she had sometimes. She would kind of roll her eyes, and I was deeply hurt. It felt like a huge disrespect to me. And I had to come to realize it was a raw spot for me. And it was so interesting because one day I said, why do you always disrespect me? And she goes, what are you talking about? I said, well, when I say something, if you don't agree, you roll your eyes. And she goes, I do? And she goes, Mark, I respect you more than anyone on the planet. I've never felt disrespect for you inside of my heart. And I was like, that was a huge thing for us because I had been keying off of that for years, decades, that she was disrespecting me, that she thought I was stupid or ignorant or, didn't understand. She didn't even know she was doing it. If you find yourself feeling really upset because your partner didn't respond to your text right away, it could be a sign that a raw spot around feeling ignored or unimportant is being activated. The second thing you do, reflect on your past emotional wounds. Think about it. To understand the source of your raw spots, reflect on those past experiences, especially in childhood or in those previous romantic relationships where you felt rejected or hurt, abandoned, criticized. See, these early experiences, they shape our emotional sensitivities as adults. Ask yourself, what situations from my past might make me extra sensitive in these certain areas? For example, maybe you had a parent who was emotionally distant. You might develop a raw spot around abandonment or emotional unavailability. When your partner's busy or distracted, it might trigger that old fear of being abandoned. And then number 3, you have to share your raw spots with your partner. This again is getting vulnerable. Once you've identified a raw spot, the next step is to share it with your partner in a vulnerable and non-defensive way. Let them know that in certain situations or comments, it touches on a deep emotional wound. That's why your reaction may seem so intense. This allows your partner to understand what's really happening with you and respond emotionally and with empathy. You might say, when you don't respond to my texts right away, it touches an old fear I have of being unimportant or forgotten. It's not about the text itself. It just brings up those old feelings. It's awful. And then respond to your partner's vulnerability with empathy. If they share their raw spot with you, don't make light of it. Don't say, well, that's stupid or that's ridiculous. When your partner shares their raw spot, respond with understanding and compassion. Remember, raw spots are not about rational explanations. They're about emotional wounds. Instead of defending yourself or minimizing their feelings, acknowledge the vulnerability they shared with you. That's huge. You might say, I didn't realize that not responding to your text made you feel that way. I want you to know that I do care about you. You're the most important person in the world to me. I'll be more aware of how my actions affect you. Finding and acknowledging raw spots can be a powerful step toward healing relationships. Once couples become aware of their own emotional triggers and those of their partner, they can avoid falling into destructive patterns, start responding with empathy, with care. And the beauty of this process, it creates an emotionally safe space where both partners feel seen and understood in their vulnerability. Rather than escalating the conflict, partners support one another, building a stronger, more secure emotional bond. See, when raw spots are handled with care, they become opportunities for a deeper intimacy, what you've been longing for all this time. By recognizing and sharing those tender places, couples can grow closer and create a relationship built on trust, understanding, and emotional safety. Well, let me just tell you this. In relationships, raw spots, they're unavoidable. We all have emotional bruises from the past. You can't grow up in this broken world and not have emotional bruises from past relationships. And they shape how we react to situations in the present moment. But by recognizing and sharing those raw spots, we can prevent them from creating distance between us. And instead, we can use them as opportunities to develop an even deeper connection. When we approach each other's vulnerabilities with empathy, we create a relationship where both partners feel truly safe, feel truly loved, feel truly understood. That's amazing. It's amazing to have a relationship like that. And your relationship can be exactly that. Well, that's the second of the 7 conversations we covered today in today's podcast. We'll look next week at the next conversation, conversation 3, revisiting a rocky moment, and that's reprocessing painful events. So we will look at how to go back and take a fight that you've already had, a conversation that you've already had, and work with that to see how to develop this whole idea of this emotional connection in emotionally focused therapy. It's just amazing how the Bible and the latest neuroscience, how it comes together. And it's so exciting to get to share that with you in Relationship Reset. So I can't wait to see you in the next podcast.